Hey there, digital world. Welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced In Later, the 1 in a million YouTube show where we talk about movies and TV shows. And I say 1 in a million because I am one of a million of them. I hope you enjoyed my Argyle review last week. I didn't mean to, but I shit on that something insane, which is far cry from my original mandate when we started this show about being no negativity and always focus on the positive. But that's what life does to you, I suppose. No new review this week. Next week is very exciting. I'll get to talk to you about the wonderful Madam Web. Everyone's expecting that to be a dumpster fire on opening. I hope not. I hope it surprises everybody. But I also saw Morbius, and that movie broke me. So this week we're just doing something regular, and we're going to tap into a regular series on this show, which we do quite often, perhaps the most often, maybe too often. But I thought I'd actually do a few of these, probably in quick succession amongst my other reviews, because I have the chance to do so. If you don't know what I'm talking about, here on Spliced In Later, we do a lot of talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Why? I'll give you my spiel that I give you before any one of these episodes. It's just because I like it so damn much. I really, really enjoy the cinematic franchise in-world that it built over the course of, how many years has it been now? 15, 16 years, maybe? It's getting up there. Way back when Iron Man came out in 2008, it was just part of the regular onslaught of comic book movies that we got back in those 2000s. Your X-Men, your Fantastic Four, your Batmans, your Green Lanterns, all of that stuff. But something special about it being that it planted the seed with that Nick Fury cameo that allowed the potential for all these Marvel movies with all these separate characters to all exist in the same world, to break off into their own franchises and do their own thing, but then be able to acknowledge each other's existence in their own adventures and then come together for big group team-ups. And then those group team-ups lead into separate franchise installment continuing, but now people can cross over more frequently. And then we add more characters and more world building, of course, to the eventual Infinity Saga extravaganza that was Infinity War and Endgame. On this show, we've been looking at it a lot. I've been trying to give you my unfiltered take on every installment that's come out for the MCU. So when I started this podcast was right in the pandemic time, so we didn't get a lot of new content straight away, meaning I went back in time. We started with Iron Man in 2008, and we were working our way chronologically through that. Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, Thor, First Avenger, etc., etc. And then once the new stuff started coming out, it started coming out in force with the combined might of theatrical release movies and Disney Plus TV shows. So with those ones, they're more of a review of those things. For instance, a movie, I would review it as I would any other newer one. Whereas looking back at the older stuff, I can give you more of just my opinion on how I felt about seeing the movie at that time, how I think it affected the MCU as a whole, good, bad, has it aged well over time, etc., etc. With the new stuff, it's more just, I think this movie was good, this is what I enjoyed, yada yada. With the TV shows, I tend to wait for the whole show to play out, and then I'll give you a take on how I felt watching it on a weekly basis. A lot of these shows are probably better to be binged. In a lot of cases, I've gone back and binged them, and my opinions of them have been better. But obviously, if Disney's going to release them on a weekly basis, then I'm going to take that in as it was intended, and how that release affects my ability to enjoy it is reflected in those reviews. Necessarily not always negative, but usually most of the time. However, for 2024, it's a bit different. Unless you've been living under a rock, you'll probably know that Hollywood at the moment is going through a bit of a what the fuck at the moment. Coming off a gigantic writers and actors strike, sticking it to those insanely greedy corporate CEO dirtbags that make millions and millions and millions and millions and billions of dollars and then won't pay royalties for streaming and want to use AI to replace actors and all of that stuff as well. All those people that had Disney and Warner Brothers and Paramount and all of that stuff, whatever. So that stopped production on things for a long time. But on the other side of that, you also had just an onslaught of MCU content where it really was quantity over quality. Everything that came out was of an inferior quality, felt factory-based, a bit lazy, a bit confusing at times. The TV shows were not being made by actual TV showrunners, meaning the sense, it's just a long movie broken up into 6 parts, while very true, does not work for TV consumption. So it's both a blessing and the curse. At the risk of destroying the brand, I guess, or just making it so they won't make any more money, and also to save what made the MCU great, everything's been sort of scaled back and stopped for a bit. With the exception of Deadpool 3, which is sort of its own thing, really. I don't really consider it an official MCU entry in the basic sense, because of Deadpool's ability to just exist outside of time and space. But aside from that, there are no MCU movies coming out this year. And I'm not sure what TV shows are coming out this year, but I don't think it's a lot. And I think it's taking a different approach to how they release these TV shows and how they're even made. Recently, the 2nd season of What If was released as like a seasonal thing where you got 1 episode a day leading all the way up to Christmas. And recently, Echo as well was billed as a more mature, violent show with less episodes and released in a binge-watchable format where you could watch all 5 episodes in one afternoon. Not even like a day. One afternoon, you could whack them out easy. And I guess everybody's gone back to the drawing board while this has slowed down. I mean, it doesn't help that Jonathan Majors has been fired as Kang the Conqueror, meaning building up to Kang as the next Thanos. Is that still going to be a thing? What plans were for the Daredevil TV show is being reworked now with like a completely new showrunner, and now addressing that it's more connected to the Netflix show than originally they wanted to do. Who knows? But in this gap of time, it allows me to go back and look at the older stuff more at a pace, more stress-free. The goalposts are no longer being moved, which is nice. So as we've been going back, we've gone through everything that's ever been considered MCU canon. There was a brief period where Kevin Feige and friends were like, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., good show, not canon. Daredevil, all the Netflix shows, not canon. Inhumans, Cloak and Dagger, not canon. They were canon when we made them, but now everything's connected and they don't count. Until now they do, because obviously that approach didn't work. But for me, they will always canon. They will always remain canon. So we've talked about a couple of shows, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Daredevil, Jessica Jones, whatever. We only really talk about the shows as a whole. I don't do season by season, because that really is just reiterating the same points over and over again, I think. But starting with today, in terms of going back in time, we are launching into Phase 3, which is the biggest big chunk of MCU stuff, I think, and I think the highest high point for them in what they were turning out and what they were building to. And hopefully during this time where we get a bit of an MCU break, I can close this gap, and on my YouTube channel you'll have a complete uninterrupted run of Jordan's takes on the whole shebang. You'll probably never listen to him, but I have OCD. Someone gave me a Pokemon Pop vinyl, and now I have to get all of them even though I don't want them. So that's just how we do things here. So kicking things off then, we are going to be talking about today Captain America Civil War, which was the 3rd and at the moment final Captain America film in the Captain America franchise. At the very least, the final featuring Steve Rogers, played by Chris Evans. If the next Captain America does indeed come out, that's led by Anthony Mackie's Sam Wilson. So it's essentially a whole new franchise, a whole new character doing a whole new thing. So that's nice. In terms of Steve Rogers' solo adventures, this is the last one for him. But also kind of an Infinity War prelude, an Age of Ultron sequel, an Avengers 2.5, if you will. Probably one of the more accessible to the cinematic universe as a whole movie, rather than just a Captain America film. Directed by the Russo brothers, who would go on to direct the 2 big Avengers finales, while also directing the fantastic Winter Soldier beforehand. I've already talked about Winter Soldier. If you want to hear me say how great that is, go check out that episode after this. I've touched on Civil War a lot on this show. It's topped rankings of my top 10 MCU films, the top 10 movies of 2016. For me, my favorite MCU film is probably always going to be Endgame, and that's not really on it's the best film ever made from this franchise. It's just, for me personally, just how much I enjoyed it as the conclusion to this world. But I can admit that probably Infinity War and Winter Soldier are better made films. But there are times when Civil War tops the chart for me. Don't know why. I think it's just because it's a very well executed ensemble piece. It is Captain America's film. He is the star, and I think it's good that it never loses sight of that. But somehow, in a way, it's like a proto-Infinity War. It was the Russos learning how to juggle a whole bunch of different superheroes who are the stars of their own franchises or supporting players, and not have them step on each other's toes to outshine others, to thrive at the expense of other people. And I say that because Iron Man is in this film. Robert Downey Jr., the scene-stealing king of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and he stands toe-to-toe with Steve and does not steal the movie from him, but also makes his presence in it extremely relevant and not just here's Iron Man in the movie. I think it balances the characters, the themes, the issues very, very well. I think it's shot very well. It's very exciting. It's a long movie, but the time goes by very, very quickly. And I think it did a really good job of sort of changing the landscape of the MCU, sort of shaking up the status quo in a way to really make it feel like we were entering a new era of this world and these characters, at least at the time. I will say there are a couple of little negatives that I will touch on at the end, but they are more of in retrospective to how the movie has aged in comparison to all the other MCU films that have come out alongside it. If you don't know what Civil War's about, it's very strange that you're listening to all these MCU episodes that I'm doing, but thank you. I'll keep explaining the movies to you if you want. But Civil War, basically, it picks up not long after Age of Ultron, which was a pretty intense fight for the Avengers. They went up against Ultron and his army of AI robots. And in the process, this wonderfully awful place called Sokovia was collateral damage. It was literally lifted up into the sky and then almost dropped into the ground. So it's been a crazy time. The Avengers themselves have changed. After all that, Tony's stepped back, become more of a consultant. Hawkeye quit to be with his family. Hulk and Thor buggered off to God knows where. We'll know where later. So the Avengers team itself is still led by Cap, still second in command by Black Widow, but now you've got Falcon, War Machine, Vision, and Scarlet Witch. On one particular mission, things go terribly awry, and Scarlet Witch accidentally causes intense collateral damage that kills a lot of people from a wonderfully unknown until this point nation of Wakanda, which is very exciting, and we'll go into that in later episodes. But that's basically the straw that breaks the camel back. The government comes in and says Avengers can no longer operate without any sort of political restraint or control, and basically gives them the Sokovia Accords. This is a thing that still hangs heavy over the MCU. The Sokovia Accords is this thing made by the UN, which basically all the Avengers have to sign. And it basically means that they will have control over what the Avengers do. They will tell them what missions to take. They will tell them what missions to ignore. If they don't sign the Accords, then they have to stop being superheroes. Cap's all like, nope, we can't give our ability to save people to a higher power because people have agendas. We can't trust that we'll always be sent to the place that we need to go. We can't always trust that we won't be able to go to where we need to go. Very important, very patriotic, very Cap points. Half the team agree with him on that. But Tony comes back in, and Tony, after being confronted by a mother whose son had died in collateral damage in Sokovia, along with, all that stuff hanging over his head about all the Stark Industries weapons and all the stuff he's been partially responsible for in war and terror, is like, nope, I think that's right. We need control. We need restraint. So half the Avengers sign with him. It's not too bad in the beginning. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of political hoo-ha about what's right and people's opinions and all of that. Nothing going terribly wrong just yet. But then at a UN meeting where they're talking about the Accords and who's going to sign and who's not, the king of Wakanda, King T'Chaka, is supposedly assassinated by a suddenly brainwashed again Winter Soldier, Bucky Barnes, Steve's best friend from the World War II, who was under ice and brainwashed by Hydra, and was basically the Merchant of Death. So that snowballs a whole thing of events where, was Bucky actually the killer? Steve wants to protect him. Tony wants to bring him in. The King of Wakanda's son, Prince T'Challa, the Black Panther, wants to just kill Bucky. All goes out of control until eventually the Avengers break completely, have a big old scuffle at a German airport, leading to realizations Some manipulations from behind the scenes from a wonderful MCU villain called Baron Zemo, played perfectly by Daniel Bruhl. It's wonderful because he's just a guy. He's not a supervillain. He's just somebody who hates the Avengers for honestly pretty solid reasons, and manipulates the Sokovia Accords and the political upheaval and everything else going on just to get them to destroy themselves. And he succeeds. That's the thing about Civil War. Civil War doesn't end with Tony and Cap shaking hands and going, you were right and I was wrong, but I was also right about this bit and you acknowledge that, and we're friends and we're the Avengers and we will save the day when called upon. The movie ends with some Avengers crippled, others running away to hide, others depressed or arrested by the government, and Tony and Steve's friendship is irrevocably damaged to a point where Steve and some others have to go off the grid and become like secret Avengers. And though Steve's like, Tony, if you ever need me, I'll be there, there's a sense that they hate each other and will never really be the friends that they were before this whole shebang. It's a perfectly executed movie. I love it. I really think Civil War is a very famous Marvel comic book arc. If you're unfamiliar with that, the principles are almost the same in every aspect. It's still Cap versus Iron Man, but I think in the comics it's more a superhero team accidentally kills a school bus of children on live TV. So instead of just signing some paper saying we'll control where you go, it's all superheroes have to unmask themselves, which is fine for Tony because everyone knows he's Iron Man, but Cap respects people's right to privacy and their families and all of that stuff. And everybody picks side on that. The X-Men and the Fantastic Four get involved in all that. I think the biggest example of how everything goes to shit in that is Spider-Man unmasks himself, and then I think immediately Aunt May gets killed as a result of that. So it's a pretty violent, dark thing, and they were never really going to adapt that beat for beat for the movie, especially because a lot of those characters did not exist in the MCU, or Disney did not have rights to just yet. But I think adapting it to something that affects what the MCU had built around these previous confrontations in New York and Washington and Sokovia, the growing collateral damage and dissent with superhero active in a world where, as Vision put it, like 8 years ago, there had not been superheroes. And then it's using all established characters while also introducing new ones who don't just get introduced for the sake of a cameo. Either they're extremely relevant to the plot or their portrayal is so charming and wonderful and brilliant that you could not go wrong with having them in it. And I'm speaking specifically about Black Panther and Spider-Man concurrently in that. Black Panther is very essential to the plot. He's essentially the third lead, which is pretty awesome. And Tom Holland, Spider-Man, everyone was... I think everybody was kind of over Spider-Man at this point. They wanted Spider-Man in the MCU, but this would be the third iteration of the character in less than 10 years, maybe just a little over 10 years. But Tom Holland straight away with his youthful energy and this new take on Spidey, also being probably one of the most comic accurate for it, I believe, really sold that. As I said, it's so good at balancing so many characters. I mean, aside from Iron Man and Cap and Black Panther and Spider-Man, you got Black Widow, you got Hawkeye, you got Falcon, you got War Machine, you got Ant-Man, you got Vision, you got Crossbones, you got Baron Zemo, you got General Thunderbolt Ross from all the way back in the Incredible Hulk. Introducing the Wakanda characters. Martin Freeman's Everett K. Ross shows up in here. Aunt May. There's so many characters in here, but no one feels like they're just there to go, hey, it's that. Like a lot of cameos in the current MCU slate do now. When Valkyrie shows up in the Marvels, you don't go, oh, she's relevant to the plot. It's, oh, Valkyrie, there's your cameo. Obviously, some characters are really more to support others. Like Ant-Man's kind of in here just to balance the teams. But they'd already worked on building him to be logically in the movie based on his interactions with Falcon in his own movie. And again, Paul Rudd, charismatic actor, he knows what role he has in this movie, which is to be funny, but also to provide the giant man support when needed. Same with Clint. Hawkeye comes back to balance out Cap's side, but Clint and his connection with Wanda as well as Black Widow makes it for solid. There's some good stuff in here with Vision, some good stuff in here with Falcon and War Machine. Everybody feels like they go on some sort of mini arc or journey in this film. Everyone is in a different place from where they start, which is great. As I said, it's kind of like a proto-Infinity War. The Russos were like, okay, so we're operating with about 10 or 12 superheroes. We can do it. Okay, now let's try Infinity War and just go absolutely insane with it. The Russos, fantastic. They know how to balance the MCU world of serious but not too serious and funny but not too funny. Superhero movies are silly. It's just the bread and butter of it. You cannot look at a superhero movie and take it completely serious unless certain elements are involved. Something like Batman, The Batman, and Logan, sure, because the superpowered comic book aspect of it is so minimal that you could take the comic book skin off it and the movie itself would still work. But when you're trying to make a movie with a bunch of superheroes getting angry at each other, and one is a World War II soldier who was frozen for 70 years, and the other is a living android with an infinity stone in his head. One has wings and can fly around, but one can shrink and grow large, and one is literally an all-powerful witch. There's no way you can sit there and go, yes, I can see this happening in real life. But it's knowing that, but still taking the material serious, but also acknowledging what world you are in. That's a lot of the flack that the Madam Web promotional stuff is getting at the moment, is Dakota Johnson and everybody are out there trying to sell the movie. And they're like, Madam Web, what's so great about it is that it's grounded in realism. And it's one of the most serious and relatable characters and worlds of all time. It's like, that's not what people want from a stupid comic book movie. They want craziness. They want silliness. They want to laugh, but they also want to have a good time. A lot of MCU directors have failed in this balance. Taika Waititi sacrifices good storytelling for stupid jokes. Sam Raimi focuses more on horror and creeping you out rather than adapting to what that in the MCU would look like. Even far back as Kenneth Branagh with the first Thor, he was just making a Shakespeare movie that just happened to have Thor in it, but so serious that he came off dry and stale and whatever, all of that stuff. Even James Gunn, to an extent, sometimes is a little bit too silly. The difference there is that James Gunn knows how to write characters, so he gets away with it. The Russos can take very serious content, like Winter Soldier, a sleeper agency of evil Nazi spies inside a government agency that rise up and take over, or a super evil alien that gathers 6 stones together, clicks his fingers, and wipes out half the universe. But also can have really funny moments that make you laugh and go, this is fun. I'm watching a fun superhero movie. And it's true here in Civil War. It's very heavy stuff, and some really serious shit happens in here. But it's still fun to watch, especially like when Ant-Man and Spider-Man are having a good time, or Sam and Bucky are riffing on each other, or even Steve and Tony, while they're arguing, they're still putting in some funny shots of each other. So I think that's what's really great. Obviously, them doing Civil War, I think, is what made the powers that be go, yes, you are the guys to do the next Avengers movie. Go at it. So hats off to that. Civil War is very rewatchable for me as well. It's just so well balanced and so much fun, but also makes me feel emotions. Makes me feel the right way in certain aspects, rather than just, that's a bit goofy or that's a bit too serious. It's really good. Civil War tops most of my favorite movies. It's great stuff. Having said that, let's not be, it's the greatest movie of all time, even though it kind of is one, I suppose. But in retrospect, it's not perfect. And I think that is because of how the MCU has progressed after that point, and a little bit before that point. If you'd asked me even 5 years ago, I would have been like, Civil War's great, perfect, no notes. But looking at it now with how the world has progressed, and indeed how the world progressed before it, I can see some issues with it, which are a little glaring the more the MCU expands with the threat of snapping in on itself. The first big one being is the way the movie has to sell you that Steve and Tony are the best of friends, and their friendship is rock solid, and everything that happens in this movie fractures it in such a way that it's devastating. Don't get me wrong, it is, and it is a testament to this movie alone and how the Russos do the execution of this story that make you feel for that inevitable moment at the end of the movie where Tony realizes how connected Bucky is to his parents' death, and whether Steve did or did not know the fact that he chose to protect Bucky instead of Tony. It's heartbreaking stuff, and they really lose complete trust and faith in each other and just wail on each other. It's insane. It's very upsetting and very perfectly executed. But that also is based on the belief that these two were hardcore best friends the moment the movie goes in. And that's honestly not the case. And that's not really the movie's fault, but it's kind of the opposite of what we have now. Before Civil War, the Avengers, it was very slowly building the MCU. It was being smart about it. You know, you had your Avengers and your Age of Ultron, and they were referencing each other in other movies and acknowledging events. But they weren't hanging out yet. You know, Tony hadn't gone to have an adventure with Steve and vice versa. So the only interaction you really had with those characters, and you got a sense of their relationship and how they felt about each other, were in the previous two Avengers films. And for the majority of those movies, they hated each other. They were constantly annoyed by each other. They were frustrated. They were trying to pull the wool over their eyes at certain points or undermine them. And in essence, by the end of each movie, they come together as a team and they do respect each other and they save the day. But I don't get the sense that they're like, yes, BFFs for life. Especially at the end of Age of Ultron, where Tony essentially made Ultron and nearly destroyed the world. And Steve's kind of like, what the hell, man? And Tony goes, well, you know, I did what I thought was right. So there's that essence of, I get what you're saying and how you're showing it to me is working very, very well. But I don't think the world as a whole has earned this point for these characters to fracture in that way. Had Civil War come a lot later? Maybe. But the fact that we had to get to Infinity War and all of that, I get why it's in here. It's just something in retrospect, looking back in the movie. And the same afterwards. At the time, the movie ends, the Avengers are fractured, Cap's hiding out in Wakanda, who knows where Thor and Hulk are, Rhodey's paralyzed, Tony's all sad. It really promises like, the world is different now, the Avengers are gone, we're going into uncharted territory here. But it never really took advantage of that situation. Between that and Infinity War, there were 5 movies. 3 of the movies are about brand new characters. You had your Doctor Strange movie, Spider-Man and Black Panther, who had been introduced in Civil War, but were not really connected to the Avengers and the fact that they broke up and anything. Spider-Man sees Iron Man as a mentor, but he doesn't really care how he feels about Cap. Black Panther's just worried about keeping stability in Wakanda. He doesn't really go and check on his sleeping super soldier out in Wakanda's jungles because he's got enough to deal with. Aside from that, you also had 2 other movies not even set on Earth. You had your Guardians Volume 2, who were already so disconnected from this world it didn't matter, and Thor Ragnarok, which took the 2 characters that didn't even know there was an Avengers breakup, Thor and Hulk, and gave them their own adventure. So by the time you pick up for this world and these characters, it's Infinity War. And Infinity War goes by so fast, it doesn't really take a chance to look into how this world is and how these characters are, because it's shit. He's got 3 Infinity Stones, we gotta go. And then by Endgame, the whole world's fucked anyway. So in essence, when I'd finished watching the movie in 2016, I'm like, this is great. This is a brand new world we're going into. And though I still love it, and I still love the Infinity Saga, looking back, I'm like, the Civil War that it set up, this world without the Avengers, these broken shells of superheroes, we never really got that. And we probably never will, because now it's all about multiverses and cheap cameos and everything else like that. So in essence, that feels like a missed opportunity. Perhaps the first sign of the MCU turning in perhaps the wrong direction. Who knows? But those are just because I feel like I didn't want to be all positive about this thing, because I can admit that Civil War is probably not the best MCU film. There are probably quite a few films that are better than it, but I really like it. But I wanted to prove to you that I also can acknowledge that there are drawbacks and faults. In essence, not the movie's fault, but if you exist in a cinematic universe where all this stuff is together and everything is important to everything else, as Kevin Feige is constantly wanting to say, you know, Echo is the most important thing in the MCU right now. Werewolf by Night is the most important MCU thing right now. Then, you know, you have to look back at this stuff and analyze it on the basis of where that world has led to since that point. Anyway, whatever. Civil War gets a 10 out of 10 from me. I think it's great. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. So, yes, Madam Web review will be coming at you next week. In a couple of weeks, we'll also be getting you Dune Part 2, which I'm very, very excited to see and talk about that one. And into Spliced, we'll probably be doing some more MCU stuff. I think I want to talk about Luke Cage next, if my chronological map is correct. And maybe we'll talk about some other stuff. Who knows? I'm currently watching that Masters of the Air show. That's pretty good. I just finished Percy Jackson on Disney+. Who knows? I honestly, until I sit down, open my laptop, pull out my microphone and start speaking, unless I've physically seen a movie and I'm ready to review it, I don't really know what it is I'm about to start talking to you about. So I hope you enjoy it, whatever it is. But until next time, I love and appreciate you. As always, thank you so much for listening to me. It means the world to me. It really does. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.